Hello, good morning. Today we're talking about emotional manipulation and ways to set boundaries so that we can protect ourselves. So, how to identify different types of psychological and emotional manipulation, and also some steps that you take to set boundaries. So, hi everyone, I'm Alexandra. If you have any ideas or topics that you want to talk about, feel free to post them in the chat or the comments, and I will definitely take that into account. Somebody actually had requested a topic on physical abuse and shame, and that's huge. And for many people, that is a huge topic. The thing is that I got inspired to do this particular talk because we don't usually talk about the emotional and psychological abuse that happens. And sometimes, unfortunately, what do I have there? Oh, it's a cut, scratch. Sometimes the emotional and psychological abuse leads to or is in tandem with physical abuse and sexual abuse, unfortunately. And sometimes the emotional and psychological abuse is far worse and or more damaging and or more pervasive than the physical and sexual abuse. And some people have lived with that for decades. And I remember that another thing I want to talk about is verbal abuse, which sometimes can go with emotional abuse, emotional and psychological abuse. The thing is that emotional abuse and verbal abuse, a therapist once called that the silent killer, because we're so focused. Sometimes you can um I mean, as a woman, like, I always knew physical abuse 100% wrong. I knew I could distinguish what that was, but emotional and verbal abuse, that's a lot more difficult to, to identify and to understand. So, before we get on or move on, I just wanted to make a quick disclaimer. I am not a therapist. I am not a counselor. I would love to. I might get a PhD in psychology and or counseling, but I don't have that yet. So, I am a certified professional coach, and I am a certified happiness trainer. So, I do have a lot of knowledge on emotional intelligence, on happiness, on some of these factors that I don't have any education really other than my own education on, like, trauma and things like that. So I'm going to try to stay away from that. I will be doing some interviews though, where I will be getting some other experts to share and talk about. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share an article that I found on what does this is from Psych Central, so Psychology Central. This is specifically about emotional manipulation, what it is and how to cope. And so at least I can use the words that are, in the lingo of the industry to help us identify it. So when someone uses your emotions to get what they want, steer your behavior, or influence your ideals, that's known as emotional manipulation. And it says manipulation is the act of trying to control something or someone. For example, when you manipulate something with your hands, you're positioning it to your intent. Oh, why is my face not showing? Did I not do this correctly? Let's see. Stop sharing. I'm going to share again. Oh, there I am. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so when someone else wants to control your journey and can't do so, okay, I'm not seeing it. Huh, that is weird. Okay, well, I'm just going to say it then, because for some reason it is not showing. Okay, I'll just say it then. No worries. We're all good. My mother has Chris Riddle. Thank you. My mother has manipulated and emotionally abused our family for decades. We did not recognize it as such. Oh, both my sister and I have had abusive relationships that felt normal to us. That is exactly why I am doing this. I feel exactly the same. I feel exactly the same. So I knew what physical abuse was, like I could identify that. But I didn't know that I was being emotionally manipulated. And so we're going to talk about some ways that you can spot that And I'm so sorry again that that happened to you. And unfortunately, it's pervasive. It's pervasive. And so that's why I want us to, to really be, to be able to identify it. And the thing is, and I've gone to therapy. You said you're recovering now. That's amazing. Um, it still happens, unfortunately, at least for me. Like I'll still see it, and I'm getting better and better at identifying it. Thank God. And I'm getting faster and faster at identifying it, which is amazing. So I think the awareness is really the key. So I'm just going to continue reading. I'm sorry I can't share it, but I will link in the comments. Actually, let me see if I could do that here. I'm going to go ahead and link the article. You guys can follow along if you want, or you can read it later. It says manipulation is the act of trying to control something or someone. Humans, as creatures with their own thought processes, aren't so easy to control. You have your own set of wants, needs, and interests. When someone else wants to control your journey and can't do so physically, they might turn to tactics of emotional manipulation. So, the quote here from Dr. Harold Hung is emotional manipulation is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person seeks to control another person's emotions. And it says it's not always a product of conscious thought, and I'll attest to that. Like I remember doing it myself in some relationships, even though as a on as a codependent of a narcissistic family, I tended to be more empathetic, and I'm sure many of you are very similar to that. But I did, because that's what I learned. To get things, you had to, you were manipulated into getting things. So I sometimes use that. Fortunately, I was able to identify it after I did it, but I 100% in the moment was not aware that I was doing. Like I wasn't doing it intentionally to be an a-hole. I wasn't trying to do it to be a jerk. But afterward, I was like, that was a little manipulative, and then I was able to be aware of it. So this is what we're talking about, so that we're able to identify it when it happens. It says some people who experience abuse develop manipulative behaviors because their abusers punish them for trying to express their needs in healthy, direct ways. Other people act manipulative because they grew up in households where there was routine behavior and they didn't get the chance to learn other ways to communicate. And this is why it's so, like, let's break that cycle now, right? Let's be aware of it. And I don't have kids yet, but I'm so grateful that I didn't have children 10 years ago, because I probably would have perpetuated some of these behaviors to my children. So when I do have kids, I'll be able to speak and be able to communicate in a more healthy way with them, so that they feel better, and also so they don't perpetuate that behavior with their kids, hopefully. So what does it look like? Emotional manipulation can wear many faces. For example, it can come in waves of anger, expressed disappointment, ridicule, or guilt. Gaslighting can occur when someone tries to make you doubt your perceptions or memories. It didn't happen that way. You were just overtired, is an example of gaslighting comment. And I know we hear gaslighting all the time when we talk about narcissism, right? That's almost become a buzzword, a buzz term in, just everywhere. Everybody talks. I wanted to stop, not talk about narcissism so much in this today, but we all have faced or dealt with a narcissist. Many of us, even in our own families, possibly even partners, right? Love bombing is when someone showers you with affection and praise to draw you into the start of a relationship. So that's definitely something I've experienced in a relationship. Fortunately, no longer with them. Okay, so here are some other common emotional manipulation tactics and what they may sound like. Guilt. If you loved me, you wouldn't do that. Criticism. You never do anything right. Isolation. You're picking your friends and family over me. Humiliation. I'll take you out to dinner when you lose some weight. Threatening. If you ever do that again, you'll be sorry. Blaming. You look what you made me do. Accusing. I know you're being unfaithful. Infidelity. I could do better than you anytime I want. So the big one that stands out to me is guilt. I've definitely experienced that from my own family and partners. And I think that's a big one. I think that the emotional manipulation part, the worst part, is guilting someone into doing something or making them feel guilty for that. And I think that's one of the things, big pieces that stood out to me when I started hearing about this emotional manipulation, is really that guilt part. I think that's the worst. Emotional vulnerability versus emotional manipulation. Expressing your emotions isn't emotional manipulation. Okay, so this is a good distinction here. So, expressing your emotions isn't emotional manipulation. You're allowed to cry, stomp your feet, or indicate how you're feeling at a given moment. Crying to express vulnerability doesn't mean you're necessarily trying to sway someone to your cause or gain their support. Sometimes you just need to cry. It's important that we be aware of the ways in which our society devalues vulnerability and how that affects our perceptions. So, how does emotional manipulation affect relationships? Emotional manipulation can have a major impact on your relationships. Excuse me. It can damage trust, cause resentment, and affect your and affect your mental health and well-being. And we have a comment here: withholding love from your child response. I kept trying to be perfect to be loved. Yeah. The term narcissism is definitely overused. Yes. Yeah, I'm trying not to use that term whenever possible because I feel like everyone, it's like, oh, he was a jerk. He's a narcissist, right? Somebody did something. And interestingly, in the narcissism world, real narcissists will accuse other people of being narcissists, right? And so it perpetuates. So I try to remove that word. I try not to use it, even though when I identify it and I see it, So, for example, somebody specifically in my family who I believe is the N word, the NAR word, um, but they're not clinically diagnosed. And so what I try to say is I say that they have narcissistic tendencies when I refer to that, because they do have some narcissistic tendencies. But guess what? I have some narcissistic tendencies. You have some narcissistic tendencies. All of us, if we are human and alive, we have some narcissistic tendencies, or we have some tendencies, right? That are within the, what is it called again? The personality disorders, right? Each of us has something because we're not like fully evolved beings. So we each have some of that if we are humans. The important thing, though, and what I want to talk about today is being aware of it. Being aware is the most important thing. Okay, so it says emotional manipulation in relationships can create stress, resentment, and fear around being manipulated. So it says emotional manipulation can even lead to chronic conditions associated with abuse, such as low self esteem, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And unfortunately, can you see and maybe even reflect on your own life, and I'll reflect on mine, where when you have low self-esteem, when you are depressed, when you have anxiety, how then you might even have other people continue to be manipulative towards you. Like I'll use myself as an example. I was at a really low point in my life when I ended up dating a partner who was the probably the most emotionally abusive and verbally abusive partner I've ever had. Like basically the only partner I've ever had that's been emotionally and verbally abusive. But I was at a low point in my life. I was already a little bit depressed and had low self esteem, and then I ended up having that partner treat me like that. And so it's like it kind of perpetuated, right? And then, well, of course, then you end up with verbal abuse and emotional abuse, and then you still don't feel good about yourself, right? Then it made my self-esteem worse. And I got more depressed and had more anxiety, right? I've actually, fortunately, I've never gone to substance abuse, but can you see where people would, right? Maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's drugs to get the edge off, right? So that's why I want to bring this up now so that we can identify it and cut it before it continues. It says emotional manipulation can be a form of emotional abuse, right? Abuse is defined as a pattern of behaviors used to control or maintain power in a relationship. A guilt trip once in a while might not meet abuse criteria, but consistent guilting or guilting paired regularly with other forms of emotional manipulation could. So, how should you respond to emotional abuse? Here we start talking about boundaries, right? And as again, someone who had grew up in a I guess I won't say a narcissistic household, but a household that had a lot of narcissistic tendencies, I never learned boundaries. I never learned boundaries, or I never learned appropriate boundaries, right? Boundaries are blurred when you're in an emotionally or psychologically abusive space. And so I've had to learn as an adult, I've had to learn boundaries. So the first thing it says here is stepping away. If you feel as though someone is manipulating your emotions, it's okay to step away from the situation to regather your thoughts. So it says it's, going to step out for 20 minutes to gather your thoughts. And then when you return, you'll try again to discuss the issue at hand. So if you're having an argument or you feel like you're being, emotionally manipulated by a partner or a friend or a family member, it's okay to go away, take a walk, clear your head. And then, once you're a little bit more centered, then you can, or calm, you can get back into that argument or disagreement, but from a clearer space. The second thing it says here is developing your communication skills. Practice stating your own needs, desires, and boundaries clearly and without apology. The more comfortable you are with direct communication, the easier it is to spot manipulation for others. And one thing I had to learn is to say no. No is a complete sentence. And let me see if it talks about this later. So one thing for me that I felt was really important to do is, and we get to like practice this, okay? So it's not like you're going to learn about boundaries and all of a sudden you're going to be like a badass boundary maker, right? Or boundary setter. So sometimes you have to learn, like take little steps. So one thing you can do is, first of all, practice saying no. Um, one idea I had when I was coming up with, talk what I was going to say for this talk is, you can tell, like, let's say, with telemarketers, usually what we do is we hang up. At least I do. I'm like, I just don't even want to engage. But first of all, that's a little bit, in my humble opinion, and I'll just say for myself, it's a little rude, right? I wouldn't want to be hung up the phone if I was doing my job. So you can practice saying no, thank you. No, I'm not interested. Please remove me from your list, from your call list, or please add me to your do not call list. What does that do? That tells them that you're not going to allow that, you're not interested, and to remove you. That's placing a boundary, right? Remove me from your do not call, or add me to your do not call list. What should you Another thing here, it says exiting the relationship, and it's okay to leave an emotionally manipulative relationship. So it says, as early as possible, try to remove yourself from the situation and reach out for help from a trusted friend, family member, therapist, or hotline. So I don't want to tell or recommend that. So that I don't want to get too much into that. But look, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It could be a friendship, right? I have a better relationship with this cousin now. But when I was in high school, I had a cousin that was my same grade. We went to the same school, and she's a beautiful person, but she was very strong. She had a very strong personality and bordering on controlling slash emotionally manipulative. And I had to distance myself from her as I grew. I mean, the formative years as a teenager. And so I like kind of left the relationship. And then as adults, then I found my way back to her, and she's doing therapy and she's working through her own stuff. And now I love her to death. And, and if I see any behavior like that again, then I know I can set some boundaries, but I'm in a different space now. Sometimes you don't have the ability, the emotional strength, or even the communication skills to be able to set those boundaries, especially with intimate partners or your family, right? That's why I wanted to bring this up today, so that we can see and be able to identify what that is. Okay, so what should you not do? Don't feel responsible. Guilt can be a powerful tool of emotional manipulation. So, and this is, I mean, across the board, I think that with emotional manipulation, definitely the person doing the emotional manipulation is gonna pull on your heartstrings, is gonna pull on your your empathy, your kindness, right? Your niceness, your people pleasing. So don't feel responsible if that's what the suggestion here. It also says don't give out information. Not all emotional abuse comes through intimate relationships. To help prevent emotional abuse, the um the therapist here says suggests limiting the information you give out about yourself, such as fears, insecurities, or vulnerabilities. Mhm. Don't try to reason. This is a good one. You'll never win an argument because they will only twist your words and use them against you. The more you try to reason, the more they will gaslight you and make you doubt yourself. Right. So it says along these same lines, bringing up the other person's shortcomings may not prove any points either. They may turn the blame on you before they take on any responsibility. Right. So I think the key here is to be able to be aware of it, identify it and be aware of it, and know that somebody who is trying to emotionally manipulate you isn't trying to reason, right? If they've got a shred of awareness in themselves, maybe you can bring it up to them, right? And maybe they'll be able to, like with my cousin in her example, she was doing therapy. So I was able to place boundaries with her and she recognized it. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get emotional. Because like that's a perfect example of somebody like you can reason in a sense with somebody who wants to reason, who is doing the work, who has self-awareness themselves. But that's not always going to be the case. I have other family members who they don't have any emotional awareness and there cannot be any reasoning with them. And that's okay too. That's why we're learning how to place boundaries. That's why we're having this discussion. You know, this is just one little maybe a planting a seed for some of us of what we can see, how we can identify and maybe what we can do, right? And before I move on, I'll say this. If you have experienced abuse or have trauma or have PTSD, 1,000% I recommend going to see a licensed therapist to discuss what you need and get support from a licensed therapist. We as a community can support each other in the way that we can, but sometimes you just need a licensed therapist or counselor to support you. The support that I've gotten from licensed therapists, I don't think anyone else would have been able to do. So one other thing it says not to do is it says don't give in to demands. Hong recommends, the doctor says, not giving into the demands of someone using emotional manipulation, no matter how small. He indicates doing so only reinforces their behaviors and makes them think they're effective. So here's the thing with placing boundaries is you've got to say what you do stand for, tell them what you don't stand for, and then have repercussions if they don't, right? So you can say, don't speak to me like that. That's one. That's telling them what you don't stand for, right? But then at some point, if they're continuing to do it, then you're gonna have to like place a real boundary, you know? Like if they continue to speak to you like that, then you're going to leave the house. Or I don't know, or you're gonna say, look, I need to take some time away to gather my thoughts, whatever. There needs to be a repercussion if they keep being a boundary crosser, right? So it's fine. It's like, have you ever heard, oh, what's the term? When people, uh, yeah, if you don't have any consequences to people breaking the boundaries or overstepping boundaries, then there's no point in having a boundary. So there needs to be a line, right? The boundary is the line. And if they keep crossing the line, then there needs to be repercussions to that. So as an example, when I was dating that particular that boyfriend that was emotionally and verbally abusive, he kept doing it and then he would say he was sorry. And I was like, okay. And in my mind, I was like, well, I'll give him another chance. Like I kept on giving him more and more and more chances. I never drew the line. I never had the line. So I never had the boundary to begin with. And then if I had like maybe a very soft line drawn in chalk, he would cross it. And then I was like, I kept on drawing lines further and further back. That is just not healthy. Of course I recognize this now, but at the time I didn't know boundaries. I had no boundaries. So I had to learn boundaries. From that relationship, I learned boundaries. Talking to a therapist. The therapist helped me create and learn boundaries. So it says here routine emotional manipulation that pushes you past your boundaries, makes you feel threatened, or is negatively impacting your mental health may be a form of abuse. Couples therapy is not often effective for abusive relationships. And then it says if you need to remove yourself from an abusive relationship, help is available. You can call the National Domestic Hotline, Domestic Violence Hotline. I'm going to push that in here for anyone who needs help. And so that was we're talking about a relationship. But if I had issues when I had the issues with my partner, I went to a therapist. But when I was going to the therapist, all of these other things where I was seeing that there weren't boundaries with my coworkers, with my family. And so I had to learn how to place boundaries with all of those different areas, in all of those different areas. And so it says, let's recap. Emotional manipulation is a misuse of your feelings to push you toward behaviors or thoughts you wouldn't otherwise align with. While emotional manipulation can occur naturally throughout life, patterns of gaslighting, love bombing, guilting, or humiliating can be a part of emotional abuse. And I didn't get into it too much, but I suppose you could be love bombed by friends also. But love bombing, for those of you who don't know, is when someone puffs you up, makes you feel good, maybe gives you gifts, compliments, puts you on a pedestal, only to then say, once they have you, let's say as a partner or as a friend, then they go into putting you down. So that particular partner did it for like 3 months. I finally got into a relationship with this person, and then it was like 180 in behavior. But because I was like, oh, but he acts like this, and so I made him act like a certain way, and then the 180 behavior, it was the gaslighting was, wait a second, but am I the crazy one? Right? So that's where it's like all of that behavior is part of the emotional abuse. I didn't want to get too much into that, the gaslighting and the love bombing part, but I think that because I can see the guilting and humiliating is very common in abusive families, right? So it's not just in relationships. But it's important to note that this is happening in your relationships because that unfortunately is the sometimes a basis for domestic violence and other forms of abuse, sexual abuse, and other domestic and intimate partner abuse. So yes, let me see if I had anything else in my notes that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I was gonna say, start small. Start small. Maybe it's like I said, practice saying no. That's a boundary. Um, you can say no, thank you. No, thank you is a totally appropriate. As in the dating world, I instead of ghosting people, right? The mature, which is like basically not ghosting, is not responding to somebody who wants to ask you out or is trying to connect with you. Instead of ghosting, you can just say no, I'm not interested. I had a great time meeting you, but I'm not interested in taking this any further, or whatever. You could say something like that, but that is a way of placing boundaries. And if you get good at placing small boundaries, it helps you build confidence so that you can place larger boundaries. So when somebody does do something, or if somebody does something that crosses the line into emotional, psychological, or other type of abuse, you can identify it and you can place appropriate boundaries and also, if necessary, get out of that situation. And I'm not just talking about a relationship like a romantic relationship. Again, it could be work. Guys, work can be, oh my gosh, I just didn't even, that's a whole other spectrum of emotional abuse or emotional manipulation, right? I mean, I've had an emotionally manipulative boss too, and I got out of that situation. But so that happens at work too. So it could be in a romantic relationship, it could be in a family relationship, it could be at work and friendship. Or maybe, who knows? It could be at church. Oh my gosh, the possibilities are endless. Can you see potentially a church environment being emotionally manipulative to get people to donate or to get people to volunteer, to get people to do other things, right? So it doesn't even have to be just a intimate relationship. It could be other settings as well. Institutional settings could have emotional and psychological manipulation. So that's why I wanted to bring this up today so that you can identify it, so that you could be aware of it, and then you can learn to place those boundaries, or at least start small and start placing those boundaries. And once again, I 100% endorse going to therapy if necessary, if you feel like if you feel like you need that additional um, clinical support for you. So let me know, are there other topics that you would like to learn about? And so I would love to know if you had a takeaway from this discussion. What was your biggest takeaway? And yeah, if you haven't yet, I'd appreciate if you like this video. And if you haven't subscribed, I'm going to be doing more a series on these topics. I think it'll be definitely helpful for each of us who are going through different types of I either have gone through abuse and or identifying different types of abuse and also supporting other survivors. I think I'm done for now. That's all that I wanted to talk about. I would love to hear your thoughts. What was your main takeaways? And if you had any thoughts or anything you wanted to talk about, have a discussion on, make sure to post it in the comments or in the chat so that I can see that for future. And yeah, I think that we're done for now. Appreciate you all. All right, everyone, have an amazing rest of your day. If you found this video helpful, you may also enjoy this one. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more tips on dating intentionally toward holy matrimony. Remember, you deserve a relationship that builds you up, not tears you down. And God bless.